Hello, this is Al, and this is the Peanut Butter Podcast for May the 6th, 2022. There's been a lot going on in the world, and a lot going on in politics, and a lot going on everywhere. Tonight, we're going to start with a discussion about freedom. We're going to talk about freedom fighters and freedom protesters, and what exactly is freedom. So, we'll start with that last question. What is freedom? So, freedom to a lot of different people means a lot of different things. To me, freedom is the ability to do within reason what you want to do with your life without stepping on anybody else's toes and within the law. The law, of course, being dictated by elected governments who put those laws in place. So it breaks it down to pretty much being that simple. You're free to do what you're free to do within the law and without messing up anybody else's day. So we had protesters go to Ottawa, the trucker convoy, the trucker protesters, freedom fighters, freedom convoy. They went to Ottawa with a mission, part of which was to dismantle the federal government. They had a memorandum of understanding for the Governor General to sign to dismantle Parliament. And they wanted freedom from COVID restrictions, among other things that they weren't real clear on. But that was the big thing, was freedom from COVID restrictions. Of course, the measures were awful to live through. In the last 2 years, people have lived through something that hopefully we'll never live through again. Hopefully we never have to live through something like this in future generations. That this will be the last time that we have to handle something the way we just had to handle it. And I mean, the fact is that it was a really difficult time. It was hard on everybody's mental health. And you've got to fully acknowledge the effects of the pandemic on people who didn't even get COVID, but whose mental health was affected, whose livelihoods were affected, whose businesses were affected, whose families were affected. It was a worldwide phenomenon that touched everybody I know, and I'm sure it touched everybody in the world. So with that being said, the restrictions were uncomfortable. Masks aren't fun to wear. It's not fun to be told you can't leave your house. It's extremely hard on your mental health to be told you can't go to work. It's hard on your financial future. It's hard on your financial present to be told you can't go to work. If you go back to the early days of the pandemic, where everybody was literally told you can't leave your house. I mean, think about that for a second. At one point, a year and a bit into the pandemic, we were told you can't leave your county. You can't leave your municipality. You can't leave your town. If you have a grocery store in your town, that's where you go for groceries. All in the name of protecting people from getting a virus that was killing people and to keep from overwhelming the healthcare system, which for decades has been an issue. But that's an issue for a whole different discussion. So around the discussion of freedom, what exactly is freedom? So that, of course, is going to be different from different perspectives. And, of course, people are going to have opinions about what other people's freedoms should be. So for you or I to sit in judgment of somebody for feeling that their freedoms should be a particular way, as long, in my mind, as those freedoms aren't interfering with anybody else's enjoyment of their life, then they should be good to go, right? Within the law and without affecting anybody else's enjoyment of their own life. So at what point does a fight for freedom reach a balance where we can start to have a sensible discussion about it without having to have protests and without having mobs and without having parties in downtown Ottawa for 3 weeks? And at some point, we've got to strike an agreement on all sides of every issue that we can have a sensible and logical adult discussion about it. In the wise words of Dwight Yoakam, we're losing the ability to even disagree with each other, and that's really dangerous. So what is the freedom that they're fighting for? And I'm talking specifically about the people who went to Ottawa, the people who blocked up the Ambassador Bridge, the Canada-US border crossing. What is the world they want to live in? Do they support wide-ranging freedoms of others, including freedom of expression, cultural freedom, freedom of non-traditional marriage, the freedom to have an abortion, the freedom to express yourself in whatever way you choose, the freedom that if you feel you want to protect your health, you can wear a mask, you can get vaccinated. At some point, there's got to be a balance where most people can agree that we've reached a balance of freedom. And again, you've got to balance that with the law, you've got to balance that with other people's enjoyment of their lives, while also not restricting people's creativity, not restricting people's movement, not restricting people's growth. So if that's the kind of freedom that we're fighting for, is people's growth and freedom and prosperity and their health, I'm all for that. Freedom is a good thing. With all that said, we still live in a society where we require laws to protect people from people. We have malicious people who will attack other people, they'll rob other people, they'll cause other people problems. We have people who unwittingly cause other people problems. Somebody backs into your car in a grocery store parking lot and they drive away. There are laws that hold that person accountable. There are insurance companies that will hold that person accountable. So within freedom, there has to be balance and there has to be accountability. Given that the goal of the protest was partly to dismantle the federal government, who then administers the controls on the freedoms and on the responsibilities and on the accountability? If we don't have the federal government and we don't have anybody in power, elected or not, to determine what the laws are and determine how to enforce them and determine to what extent we can go to enforce them, what do we do then? So the question I'd ask of convoy protesters or freedom fighters or however you want to refer to them is, what do you mean when you say freedom? What does anybody mean when they say freedom? So here we live in Canada, and Canada is pretty much, I would have to say, one of the top 10 freest countries in the world. And yet we still have people who legitimately or otherwise feel like they're not as free as they should be. In a democracy, in any discussion about freedom, you've got to start with the freedom to vote, the freedom to participate in the electoral system, the freedom to participate in making the laws that govern the land. And there are channels through which to participate. Yes, they're slower moving than blocking up a road to make your point, but those are the channels that are in place. And they actually work quite well, because we're still succeeding in this country with relative freedom and a pretty decent balance of freedom to responsibility. Because with great power of freedom comes great responsibility as well. So everyone has the right to participate, the right to vote. If you want to throw your hat in the ring as a candidate and make your point that way, you're absolutely free to do that. So fighting for freedom surreptitiously around the electoral system, but trying to engage the electoral system in the form of politicians that were already elected in an election that happened months before, is not an effective way to bring about change. Change in a society of 40 million people is going to be slow moving. It's a huge country. It's massive, land mass wise. Well, it's not that dense. There's 40 million people with massively, drastically different experiences from the Arctic to BC to the coast of Newfoundland. So in acknowledging that all of these perspectives have to be represented and acknowledged and that they're all of equal value, it's up to each and every one of us to exercise the freedom that we do have in order to expand on that freedom. So rather than throwing out the freedoms that we have, throwing out the system that we have, it's a tradition in this country, and it's the founding principle of this country that responsible government be continuously improved, and that we grow and we change and we adapt as the needs of the country grow and change. So that's my spiel about freedom. Exercise your freedom. Exercise your freedom to vote. Exercise your freedom to participate in elections. Exercise your freedom to participate in government if you so choose. And exercise the freedoms you have. Understand the freedoms you have. Understand the responsibilities you have. And understand the balance that's required to make it all work. So that's my stump speech. Again, this is Al for the Peanut Butter Podcast. May the 6th, 2022. Keep your stick on the ice and rock and roll.